Mr. Hartwell is our appointment, the Board of Selectmen appointee to the Retirement Board. And from time to time, we ask him to come before us to give us an update. And this is one of those from time to times.
Okay, I'd like to thank the
Welcome,
board
Tom.
for letting me come here tonight. Probably the most important thing that's happened the last couple of months on the Retirement Board is that we approved our 2016 actuarial report. And the reason why that's important is because this is what's used to set the town's contribution and also to determine what our unfunded liability is going to be, which eventually makes its way onto the town's balance sheet. The unfunded liability that's recorded on the town's balance sheet is the largest liability that you have. So it's critically important that you get the number right. What I did here today is just put, McKinsey just issued a report a couple months ago with how they view the next 20 years is going to look like for interest rates and long-term investments. And what they're saying is that on average, equities are only going to earn about 4 to 5% over the next 20 years. And fixed income securities are going to be earning considerably less, a couple percent. And why that's important is because we're going to talk about the rate that the Retirement Board used for both the long-term expected rate of return and the discount rate. Turn to the next slide. And by the way, most of the investment firms and professionals that are predicting rates long-term, they're also predicting the same thing, that rates are going, their returns are going to be down from how they've been performed over the last 30 years. The Andover Retirement Board voted to use the 7.25% long-term expected rate of return and discount rate. Now, this discount rate that they're using of 7.25%, that's how they value the liabilities. The higher the discount rate, the lower the liabilities.
So Tom, this is a rate of return?
Yes. So
Somebody
they're
would
expecting to
get-
earn 7.25 over the next 20 years. And you're going to see on the next slide when I get to it that
I mean, I can't, none of us can get that.
it just doesn't happen.
They don't get
Well,
They just never get it.
let's let him get through his presentation. and we'll-
I recommended a lower rate, and I provided an analysis and support for my lower rate. The chairman recommended the 7.25% rate without any analysis and support, and the 4 board members voted for that 7.25%. And as a result of that, they also voted to keep the 2032 target funding date. And so that means that the amount of contribution that the town is going to have to make is going to be quite considerable. It's also going to mean that every year your contribution rate is going to increase by 10%. You may not know this, but they just sent you a bill for $300 million for the next 15 years. That's how much in payments you're going to have to make over the next 15 years in retirement contributions with the contribution schedule that they just approved. Mr. Flanagan was there. They asked him about it. He wasn't ready because he was still working on his long-term projection plans. What should have happened is there should have been a dialogue with the town. They should have consulted with the town to understand, what's realistic. What can the town really pay on something like this? There's nothing magical about holding to the 2032 date. The state mandate says that you have to have it paid off by fully funded by 2040. And we shouldn't have gone with this contribution rate, but the 4 members did approve it. I'm the 5th member. I didn't approve any of this. So now we're going to have to pay $300 million over the next 15 years. It's impossible. It's never going to happen. It's unrealistic that you're going to pay $300 million. Over the last 15 years, you paid $76.2 million. Now you're going to have to write a check for $300 million. You already shown in your 5-year projections that you're going to have a deficit of $27 million for the next 5 years. If you pushed it out over the next 15 years, that deficit would go up exponentially. It will just go out of sight because of the pension costs that we're talking about here and the healthcare costs and the other costs that the town's going to be facing. The board continually uses unrealistic rates. And because of that, if you look at where we were back in the year 2000, we had an unfunded liability of $17 million. We were 80% funded. We were one of the best funded cities in Massachusetts. Today, using their numbers, which I don't believe, our unfunded liability is $133 million. So it's gone up over 800% in 15 years. And part of it is because they keep on using unrealistic rates. By using these unrealistic rates, they're saying your liabilities are lower and the town doesn't have to contribute as much. Until last year, the town hasn't been asked to contribute more. We had two recessions, the 2000 to 2002 recession and 2008 to 2009 recession. And we weren't asking the town to contribute more when our investments took a hit in 2008 by 30%. It's crazy. Now they're asking. And what they're asking for, you just can't pay the bill. Turn to the next slide. This shows you how we performed over the last 20, 15, 10, and 8 years. We earned 6.4% on our investments over 20 years, and that's because from 1996 to 1999, it was an extraordinary period where the S&P 500 from 85 to 99 increased by 19%. Treasury bills, 10-year treasuries is 7.5%. So 4 of those years are in that number, and that's why the 6.40% is high. The retirement board used an average rate of 8.25 that they projected, so they didn't even meet that. When you look at it over the 15 years from 2000 to now, we earned 3.651%. They said we're going to earn 8.13%. They continue to do this, and they say, well, because other pension plans use these similar rates, so they must be right. Well, they're not right.
Tom, does that just increase the gap when you do this? Is
Oh,
that
yes.
what's happening here?
Yeah, because it's insane. It really is insane. I'm showing here on the far right, Vanguard. If we did nothing, if we just put our money in a Vanguard Intermediate Bond Fund, which is 50% corporate and 50% Treasury, for 15 years, we would have performed better than the pension board's performing with their managing of their investments. The pension board has no investment policy, no investment strategy, no investment objectives, no asset allocation strategy. We hope to have that now because we just hired recently a consultant, but for years they've never had any of this. So they're managing $100 million with nothing, and they've given it to PRIT to manage this stuff.
So PRIT is that's the state.
That's a state investment management company.
So some towns just go into PRIT and leave it, right?
Yeah, and that's what we've done.
Okay.
We went into PRIT in 2007. We haven't changed our investment there. When you go to the state regulator, PARA can say, wait a minute, why aren't you dinging us for these not having investment policies? As a fiduciary, I would think this would be, the number one thing we should be doing. They said, well, we feel that de facto, since you're invested in PRIT, you don't have to do any of this. I came from the private sector. This is unacceptable. It's unacceptable to allow your unfunded liability to go from $17 million to $133 million, which really the case is it's much higher than $133 million. And you have the same team managing the pension plan. Where's the outrage? There is no outrage. Everything it just continues on, nothing changes. And the 8 years we've been with PRIT, now this is a bit misleading because it includes 2008, but we've only earned 3.3% with PRIT for the last 8 years. But we continue to use these unrealistic discount rates. Get to the next slide.
What do other cities and towns?
They do the same thing.
This is a statewide, nationwide issue. The masking of the size of the unfunded pension problem by using unrealistic discount rates.
That was in that article, wasn't it?
Well, there's articles everywhere.
Every day.
I've got a Wall Street Journal article I'm going to share with you and just show you the extent to which public pension systems are going to mask the size of the liability in this discount rate that Tom's spending time on tonight. This is the beginning of it. When you pick the wrong discount rate, an overly optimistic discount rate, it masks the size of the problem and takes the pressure off the need for reform. And I'll let Tom finish, and then we'll get back to it.
Yeah, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out why they do this. You know, what would happen if you lower the discount rate, make the town pay more money? It affects services, staffing levels, tax increases. So they would have had to would have been some difficult decisions to have been made over the last 15 years, and they elected not to do that. When you ask the chairman why he didn't increase the contributions by the town, he said the town was asked and they didn't want to do that. Who he asked, I don't know. I mean, it's the former administration, not Andrew. I'm sure certainly they didn't ask the Board of Selectmen on that. But it's not sustainable. You know, you're not going to be able to pay for this bill, and you need to work with the retirement board. You need to get the retirement board to come with you to come up with a solution to how to deal with some of these problems, because they're just independently doing things on their own, which is how, unfortunately, the statutes are set up today. But, you know, something has to change, or, you know, when we put this latest unfunded liability on the balance sheet, whatever that number is, it's going to wipe out your net position. When you put OPEB unfunded liability next year on the balance sheet, you're going to have over probably $100 million negative net worth as a town. And everyone says, oh, it's not going to affect your bond rating. Yeah. You know, eventually it's going to affect your bond rating. It's going to have to affect it, because it's going to have, you know, every town in the state's going to, you're not unique, okay? Every town in the state's facing the same problems. You ask, are any other towns smart enough to do the right thing? There are 2 towns that I'm aware of that are doing the right thing today, Leominster and Wellesley. Leominster has a 5.25% discount rate. They're 80% funded, and Wellesley is 6 3/4 because they have 2 actuaries on the board, and they're tough, and they make sure that they're being conservative.
So if we were to use a discount rate, say 4%, which would mirror historically what the return has been, and we were to fund, say, out to 2040, which we are allowed, what would the town be required? What would be the annual contribution that the town would be required to make on an annual basis?
I don't know what that number is, but I could tell you for 6 3/4, your unfunded liability would be 147 million today instead of 133. And if you use the contribution schedule that was used 2 years ago, you would go out to 2037. If you go down to 4%, you know, you'd be well past the 2040 period. I don't know what that would be. Eventually, they're just going to continue. They've changed that target date. 2040 used to be 2032, used to be 2028, used to
Yeah.
be 2024, used to be 2018.
18.
They're just going to row it forward, because none of these towns, you know, Springfield's unfunded liability is 26%. We're going to be one of the worst funded cities in the state. You know, there's 104 pension plans. When we were 2 years ago, we were 82 out of 104. With these new numbers, we're probably going to be closer to 90 out of 104.
When you say there's 104 pension plans?
Yeah.
That's because the remainder, the other ones are in the PRIT system?
No, they've combined. You know,
Oh,
you might have
regional?
the Essex County, where you have multiple towns that have come together and formed these pension plans.
Is there any, have those done better than?
No, I mean, what they've done is they didn't necessarily, well, prior to us going on to PRIT, we underperformed relative to PRIT, which is
I remember that.
why they encouraged us to move on to PRIT,
Yeah.
to invest with PRIT. Why some towns are better today funded is not necessarily because of investing, although it does help. It's because they woke up sooner and started contributing years ago. You know, the town started putting more money in. Last year, if you recall, you had to increase your contribution by $1 million and 8% thereafter. Now, we're asking you to increase it more and go up by 10% annually. That's what the new schedule is calling for. Now, the thing is, you still, as a town, have to do the right thing on your balance sheet. And that's recording what you think should be the unfunded liability for the pension and what the discount rate should be. This comes out of the AICPA guidance. It's the town's responsibility to come up with the number, not the plan, not the retirement board, not the actuary. It's the town. The town needs to do their due diligence and doing their analysis to come up with the discount rate and the long-term expected rate of return. That's what needs to be done. Just don't accept the retirement board and what rate they're using here.
And Tom, just to be clear on this, the retirement board is entitled to use whatever discount rate they want for the purpose of their valuation, to come up with their numbers for the retirement board and to set their funding schedule. They can do whatever they want, it's within their control. What goes on our financial statements, however, is within the town's control, within the town manager's control. That analysis can be done completely different, and a more appropriate discount rate can, in my view, should be used to more accurately reflect what that liability is. And Andrew?
And if I may build off
Yeah,
that, that's
please.
exactly what I was going to say. So while the retirement board set a discount rate of 7.25%, the town in no way, shape, or form is bound by that. And the integrity of our 5-year financial model, which we rolled out in August, and we're going to continue to work through, the integrity of that model is based on realistic assumptions. And I want to face this issue head on, and part of facing it head on is having a realistic perspective of what is really facing us in the next 5 years, which is $3.3 million, as a previous slide indicated. So based on that vote of the retirement board to lower the discount rate and maintain the 2032 schedule, the 5-year horizon is essentially going to cost us $3.3 million more than it would have the day before.
Well, that's just the incremental amount.
That's
You
just the
gotta remember
incremental
the gross dollars that we're gonna be spending over the next, even just 5 to 10 years. We're at about $9 million right now a year, $9 million appropriation. That number's gonna skyrocket. Andrew's presentation, the long-term planning, shows we're gonna be up to $100 million between health insurance, OPEB, and pension. The notion that we are gonna be fully funded by 2032, not even 2040, is a completely wrong. There's no way any community is ever going to reach it. And at some point, the state legislature is going to roll out that 2040 to 2050 or whatever it is, because there's not the sufficient reform or even acknowledgement of what the scope of the problem is yet. And I'm glad Tom is here, because I think this is part of how we start the ball rolling in the right direction, which is do a conservative, honest recognition of what this liability really is, starting with a proper discount rate.
You know, there's a term called intergenerational equality. The services from years ago and today, our future taxpayers are going to have to pay in the future. I mean, that's what's happening here. You're putting the burden of all this, not you. I'm just saying the way this works. We're making future generations of taxpayers pay for the services of today and yesterday, and it's just not fair. But that's unfortunately the model that's been set up here in this state, and it's a broken model.
So whose responsibility is it to select the discount rate that is used on our financial statements? Is it the town accountant, is it the town manager, is it a policy decision of the Board of Selectmen?
That was my question.
Who's legally responsible
Probably
to
is
identify
all of it.
this?
Well, all of the above can
Yeah,
certainly
right.
weigh in, but what is actually booked on the financials falls under the town manager.
Town manager,
Yeah,
okay.
makes sense.
That said, the board could certainly take a position on it.
Right.
So as part of our long-term planning, which we're starting into motion with, do you plan on addressing this as part of that?
So there's
Or
two.
you're gonna have to, right?
There's two sides to this. So we will pick a discount rate that realistically illustrates the unfunded liability with regard to the pension. That said, the impact on the 5-year plan is solely dependent on the position of the retirement board. So our funding requirements are based on the decisions they make. How we illustrate the unfunded liability is up to us on the financial statements and the balance sheet. So the liability number is going to be different between their actuarial analysis and what we most likely post, but what we're actually required to fund is based on their position, not ours.
Right. Is the actual benefit, is that set by law?
Yes.
And Andrew did ask the retirement board, prior to long-term planning, asked them to let the town have input before they select and validate the actuarial and the discount rate and the funding schedule, and they disregarded his request and moved forward and voted on a new funding schedule, which has already been submitted to PIRAC. So when we talk about working with the retirement board, they said no to that, and as we know, they said no to modest eligibility rules last year. So I think all we can do is do what we can do, which is recognize it, get exposure to it, recognizing the balance sheet with a proper discount rate,
Realistic.
and make sure that we, as we move forward, that we are pulling on the levers that we can pull on.
Well, what's the motivation? I mean, I know the answer to them, but ask Tom, the motivation or why they say they use the higher rate. Like, why wouldn't they go with the realistic, what's the?
Well, they're saying it because PRIT is saying that they think they're gonna earn that over the next 30 years. PRIT, has a company called NEPC doing an analysis to say, yeah, we think we're gonna earn that over the next 30 years. However, when you look at NEPC's analysis, they use a global inflation rate for the bench building block methodology rather than a domestic, and they don't take into consideration purchasing power parity. I know I'm talking about things that probably no one understands, but it causes the rate, the yields to be much higher. And there's also, I provided all this analysis of other investment firms predicting lower rates, but they disregarded it because, they feel that, the vast majority, all the other town or pension systems are using similar rates, in some cases even higher rates, so they're just keeping it within the range.
Could
Not
I?
looking at just,
Yep.
not looking at the leaders and the Beacons and the Leominster and Wellesley or whatever it is that are using the more conservative returns and show the benefit of that?
Well, they're outliers. I mean, they're two
Yeah,
out of
they're
104.
outliers, but-
And so they, we're in the pack.
Right.
So we're not the highest rate, we're not the lowest rate, we're in the middle. And that seems safe. And then you have your accountants come in and they say, well, that's within the range of what people are using. The problem is, there's not a piece of paper that says this is how we came up with it. If you can turn to the next slide.
When you say the accounts, are these the actuarials?
No, your accountant.
Our account?
I mean, the Powers and Sullivan, they
our
look at it
auditors.
for reasonableness. This is what we should have done. This is what the actuarial standards say that you should do when you come up with the rate. None of it was done. I did some of it. One of the most important, maybe the most important thing you do as a board making a decision on the rate of return and the discount rate, you don't even have a single piece of paper, not a word written on how you came up with it.
So there was no analysis done prior?
None, zero zip.
So the 725 just came out of the air?
I watched the video.
No, I don't-
Yeah,
I'm not-
and no, I don't mean to be sarcastic.
No, I
Yeah.
don't mean to be, I was just
It's
wondering
just-
how it was,
he-
it seems a little preposterous to me, that no analysis was done before you.
No.
And there's very explicit analysis that you're supposed to be going through. And there's just a herd mentality within the public pension system. And again, this is not just Andover, it's not just Massachusetts, it's across the board. And I'd like to add an answer to Alex's question. The article I just shared with you, Wall Street Journal article from August 2016, covering up the pension crisis. There was the American Academy of Actuaries, Society of Actuaries had a task force designed to look at public pensions and figure out what the problems were. And they tried to silence this task force because they didn't like some of the advice that they were being given, and then they had a reverse course. And one member of the task force said this: consistent lowballing of pension cost over the past 2 decades has made it easy for elected officials and union representatives to agree on very valuable benefits for very much smaller current pay concessions. So when you ask, what is the incentive for those running public pensions to puff up the discount rate? And because if they were honest and they were to use maybe not 4%, but certainly not 7.25%, the unfunded liabilities would explode nationwide. It would go from $1 trillion to $3 trillion, I think, for all states combined. And there's less incentive for reform. If we really are honest with ourselves, it's going to show that this is just unsustainable. We already know it's unsustainable, but the first step in doing it is we have to use honest assumptions. And I think that is the reason why They are trying to mask. And Tom, I think, was going to touch on this, but the Association of Public Pensions, National Conference on Public Employee Retirement Systems, are, in my view, trying to buy the referees. They have issued a code of conduct that actuarial firms, they want them to sign to say, if you're going to do actuarial work for a public pension, you're going to sign a code of conduct that says you will not advocate for the diminishment of public defined benefit plans, and we want public disclosure of all contributions that you're making to organizations that are arguing that public pensions are unsustainable. And our actuarial firm, Siegel, has signed on that code of conduct. They're one of only 35 nationwide who have signed off to basically say they are not going to do anything that would question the long-term sustainability of public pensions, because there is lots in the media now wondering whether these public pensions are sustainable.
And NEPC, who did the consulting firm who did the asset allocation and the projection for the 30-year rate for PRIT, also signed that code of conduct. I'm a CPA, and one of the codes we have is that not only you have to be independent, you have to give the appearance of being independent. When you cite something like that, you do not give the appearance of being independent.
No. This is the thing.
That is the code of conduct statement, and then in the back you'll see the list of firms who have signed off on this nationwide, including the actuarial firm that does both our retirement and pensions, Siegel Consulting, has signed off on this. I think that's very disappointing and concerning. And as Tom was saying, at the state level at PIRAC and PRIT, their consulting firm who advises on their long-term rates of return is also a signatory to this. And if you read this, this is basically saying, we won't do anything that will question the system. And we will not donate to any money to any organizations that are questioning the long-term sustainability of the system. And the facts are nationwide. We have example after example, Detroit, otherwise, showing where public pensions have been the source of financial collapse.
It's interesting because number 3 says act with independence and objectivity.
Yeah, as long as you don't badmouth the system.
So what actuarial firm do Wellesley and Leominster use?
I'm not sure. I think Stone is used by Leominster, but I can get back to you on that.
Yeah, I think that would be interesting to know.
Well, I think Wellesley uses Siegel, because I think the actuaries that's on the retirement board at Wellesley went actually head-to-head against Siegel, and actually denied. Siegel puts out recommendations, and in the report for the retirement board, it started at 7. It went from 7 3/4 down to 7. They didn't even show anything until Tom asked for it, anything below that. So again, to me, complying with their code of conduct, which is, okay, we won't try to highlight anything bad here.
So they came in at 7?
Well, when they showed the spread of options, Siegel said, here's what it looks like at 7.75, here's what it looks like at 7.5.
But there were only options. They weren't recommending a rate. They were just...
But they don't. That's the whole point, is they just put them out here and say, we won't take an opinion, we're just showing you what they look like. We think this is the range of reasonableness, is what they're saying. And the retirement board is just saying, okay, we'll take that one. That one looks good, and all the other people are doing it, so we'll do that, without any of the due diligence and the financial analysis that is called for to justify and defend the discount rate. And Tom's been the lone voice on the retirement board arguing for this common sense financial analysis.
You know, we can be angry about it, that we're disappointed where we are today as a town. But what we need to do is move forward and find a way to work with the retirement board and get them to come to the table and say, well, where can we go from here? What kind of reforms because they have the ability to do reforms. Have part-time workers
Eligibility.
eligibility.
Right.
There are a number of things that they can do, but also to work with the town and say what is realistic on what they can contribute.
It just doesn't seem. I mean,
because they can go back to PIRAC.
Logic on why we wouldn't be working together.
I think Tom's suggestion is a very good one. We should try to get a relationship with the retirement board that we can work with them.
Yeah.
So I know we've
asked
tried.
for that
I know
meeting?
I know we have. I'm just saying, moving
You've
forward.
asked for that.
I think the response of the retirement board has been, if you want to talk to them, you show up at their meeting. Candidly, I think that's a response, which I think is inappropriate. I think we should be able to work with them, either Andrew directly. But, it is important to remember here, and I don't think this is public enough, We have a retirement board completely independent of taxpayers. Tom is the only appointee from the Board of Selectmen, and then the town accountant is the de facto member, but it is controlled by the retirees. They decide on investments,
Yeah.
and they've had no investment advisor up until this year, thanks to Tom. They've got 40% of their investments in what are called level 3 assets, which are kind of a higher risk profile asset that Tom
They-
can
They're
talk
not,
about at some
they're
level.
they're not readily marketable, meaning that you can't get a price, you can't go to, the Wall
Commodity.
Street Journal. They are, the values of these are very difficult to come up with. They're, and to have 40% of your investments at level 3 is
Think
pretty
about that.
risky.
40% of the 110 million we have under management at Pritt. So you've got an independent board, no accountability to taxpayers, basically winging it with investment strategy up until now when we have some advisory, using unrealistic discount rates that mask the problem, and completely unwilling to work with the town on eligibility rules, if nothing else for OPEB, but for pension. That's the situation we have here. And the worst part is they can hand us the bill. They hand us the bill, we
And it's
have
all-
to pay it by state
It's all
statute.
taxpayer money.
And guess what happens? This is playing with the house's money. This is a casino money. They can do anything they want, and if they come up empty, they just hand us another bill. This is why I hope Tom's presentation tonight is the beginning of a series of discussions about the pension board, because I don't think we need a subcommittee, but I think this board needs to start talking about the issues around the pension board, maybe identify some levers, and start talking about this, because I don't think people understand just how big this is and how much of a problem this is. And we are just masking, we're complicit in masking the problem if we don't start making people aware of how bad this is, and that we're getting zero cooperation from the retirement board that's completely independent of us.
So just, it might be a good opportunity to review the makeup of the retirement board. There's 5 members of the retirement board. 2 are elected, please correct me if I'm wrong, Tom, 2 are elected by the employees.
Employees and
Retirees.
retirees.
1 is the town accountant.
Yes.
1 is an appointment of the Board of Selectmen, Tom, and then the 5th one
Is
is voted.
By the
is
other 4.
By the balance
Voted
of
by
the
the
board.
other 4. So, and the other 4 must be unanimous on the selection of the
No.
5th one?
No.
They need a majority,
They
so
need
if
a
it's a 2-2 vote,
Yeah.
So
Then
the
it comes
appointment goes to the
to us.
Board of Selectmen,
Yeah.
that 5th member. Is that correct, Tom?
That's right.
So
Okay.
when is, I'm just curious, when's the term of the 5th member?
June 30th, 2017.
This June.
So this June.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, let's try to be productive,
So
as Tom said. Let's try to be productive
it's-
rather than not be, than keep, I think the problem is out there. We see that we have a problem.
It
Let's
al-
try to be more productive.
It also signifies the importance of our town accountant, our town
Yes.
accountant
Exactly.
appointment. Where we need
You're
to
also appointing
understand
someone there, right?
the
Critical.
philosophy of the
Critical.
town accountant, as the town accountant is an employee of the Board of Selectmen.
I was gonna say, as the town accountant, it's gotta reflect
The values of
values
the
of
Board of Selectmen.
right?
And there is a question as to whether we can make it as part of the town accountant's job description, goals, and objectives to follow our direction, the board's policy as a member of the retirement board, or does that town accountant free to vote however they like once they're on the board? That's unclear to me as to whether we can do that or not.
Well, it also goes to the town accountant's appointment of the Board of Selectmen, so. The Board
Understood.
of Selectmen can choose or not choose to.
True, but once
reappoint someone.
once we appoint
They're
them and they're
on
on the
board.
retirement
Yeah, we
board,
have the opportunity to.
can they
appoint
vote their
one
free
now.
will, or do they vote the policy of the board who hired them?
Well, I think you don't hire, you
Or-
hire right.
You're an employee of the Board of Selectmen,
You
Right.
hire
Yeah.
correct.
Serve at the
Net of
pleasure.
it.
Right.
so.
Yeah, okay.
Bringing the conversation back, though, to the discount rate that we're going to use for our financial statements, when does that need to be selected? Andrew?
So the auditors came on site beginning last week, so they're in the preliminary stages of the audit. I'll need to make a decision working with the board and working with Tom, who's proven to be an incredibly valuable asset throughout this process, within the next 4 weeks.
Is that
Within the
Powers and
next 4
Sullivan?
weeks.
Yep.
So would you then, within the next 4 weeks, bring back a proposal of the Board of Selectmen and look for Board of Selectmen's support or
If-
non-support of your proposal?
If that's the will of the board, I'm happy to do so.
I think that would be a great idea. I'd like to see that.
Absolutely.
I
Yeah.
think where
We
we
should
are
have
now.
this
agree with
discussion
you.
again, yeah.
Sure.
Dan, that's a good suggestion.
So we'll have to think about that as well when we hire our town accountant.
I'll get to you.
Comes into the job description or the?
Yeah.
All right.
That was a great job.
Okay, I
Tom.
see a question out of them. Please tell us who you are.
Peter McCalligan, Lovejoy Road. Some of you have had emails from me, and I've had a real interest in this whole pension reform as well as OPEB. My background is in human resources. I'm the vice president of human resources for 3 different companies, and I've been following this pension thing as best I can from afar. But question I have: if nothing is done, and I want to make sure I heard what Tom said, if no changes are made, in the next between now and the year 15 years from now, what is the town's contribution annually going to be to the have to be made to the pension fund?
Well, over the next 15 years, in the aggregate, it's $300 million. And it goes up by 10% each year, so that, by year 15, you're contributing $25 or $30 million annually.
Okay, so last year, this last fiscal year, we contributed what, Tom?
8.6 million.
8.6 million, so it'll go up 10%, so we're just going to, that's what and although they could change the percent increase, is that correct?
Yeah. I mean, if they use the contribution schedule we used 2 years ago, which we probably wouldn't have been able to make either, but at least it's a little better. Over the next 15 years, that contribution would have been 223 million, which is still, may not be attainable, but it's certainly better than 300 million. I don't know if we need to be the trendsetter here and tell the state that, everybody needs to start being realistic. I think the town certainly was a trendsetter for OPEB.
Right.
But, this 2040 date is just not going to happen. No matter which rate you use, either 8% or 6% or 10% growth. The town is not, with all the other numbers. My sole responsibility is to protect the retirees and make sure they have the money there for when they retire. So that's my interest in this, is trying to make sure that there's money here. But we also have to make sure that there's a town that's going to be able to afford it. And the town, with these liabilities, are going to be put in a negative net position. You already are showing in 5 years a $27 million deficit with what appears to be realistic numbers. Those numbers will grow exponentially from those years out, because everything else, if it's going up 10% for pensions and 8% for healthcare or whatever, and you're only able to increase by 2.5%, the numbers just don't work.
Let's not complete. I mean, we keep restating the problem, and I think we kind of get what the problem is. We're a little bit late in our next item. So we do have kind of a course of action here. You're going to, in the next month, you'll be getting back to us, and I think we should probably at that point start to see what our next steps with the retirement board are, how we can improve that relationship and try to see if we can come up with a joint meeting would be good, but at least a joint discussion on how we're going to solve this together, because we can all just keep restating the problem, and they seem to have a lot of the cards, so we wanted to be sure that we include everyone at the table here and see if we can get it settled.
Who mandates the makeup of the retirement board?
State statute.
Statute. Supposing the accountant is not a town employee.
So the statute is very clear that the town accountant is the ex officio member.
Oh, okay, right, okay. Whether or not they're an employee of the
Well, I think there's
certain
some variation there. Town accountant or the, I think it's, if you don't have a town accountant, it's some other
You have
position.
people that have roles like controllers.
Control, right, so there's other
Controller, town
titles.
accountant.
And also auditors.
There, yeah.
An auditor can be the ex officio.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think different insurers, they
I-
don't always report to the board. So
I just want,
Right.
before the
Right.
board, I just want to acknowledge Tom for the incredible
Yeah.
amount of hours and work he's
Yeah.
been putting into this retirement board since we appointed him. And many times on a 4-1 vote basis, trying to shed some light on these really important issues. I just appreciate everything he's been doing.
Thank you.
Thank you for hanging on,
Tom.
Tony.